A few weeks ago, Sophie and I had the opportunity to join healthcare professionals and performance coaches at the annual meetup of THT Plus members, VALD in Brisbane. VALDCon 2023 wasn't just about internal reflections and team building, it was a unique gathering of healthcare experts and thought leaders to discuss the year that's passed and the opportunities for data-led care in the years ahead. During my time at VALDCon, I got to speak to lots of people who are deeply involved and passionate about the intersection of technology and healthcare, and I'm bringing you a couple of those conversations here on the podcast today. First up, I speak to Karl Goodman from Athletes Authority about how his performance facility uses technology to improve athletes' performance metrics and streamline the rehabilitation process. Then I speak to Shaun, a physical therapist and VALD team member from the US, and we spoke about demonstrating to providers the return on investment of technologies and the importance of leveraging metrics and data for effective patient treatment. Collaboration starts with a conversation, Team HealthTech. Let's make it happen. This is Talking HealthTech with me, Peter Birch, featuring content and community about technology in healthcare.
So my name's Karl. I'm one of the owners of Athletes Authority. We're a performance facility and we have two locations actually, Sydney and Melbourne. Mm-hmm. Our specialisation is with athletes. In fact, it's all we do, which is unique probably in and of itself. And we do two things. We help athletes improve their sports performance and require tech to track that, objectify that, measure that. Yep. And we also use tech to essentially facilitate proper progression through the rehab process. When athletes get injured, there is potentially commercial implications for them, certainly psychological implications for them, losing out on sport and what they love to do, potentially what they're paid to do. So we use tech to help facilitate that transition back to sport.
Yeah, excellent. I'd love to learn a bit more about that tech, and you spoke a lot about the athletes in particular. Often on the podcast, we might talk a lot about the technology from the clinician or the provider's perspective, and then the patient might have a portal or something. But obviously seeing some of the technology around here, you know, there's things that people jump on and use to measure and all that kind of stuff. I feel like though with this kind of things, like particularly with performance focused patients and athletes, that like a bit of technology and rigor around the thing to be able to get amongst it.
Yeah, well, you know, we look at how technology is integrating into our, you know, society at a large level, but at just how we live day to day, whether it's wearables or whatever it might be, and data visualization is becoming so important for athletes especially, but even people in general, to gauge progress. In the absence of that, especially with our market, with athletes, not being able to gauge progress easily is one of the biggest reasons why compliance will drop off or engagement will drop off or whatever it might be. And I can't imagine rehabbing an athlete from a day one Achilles rupture post-surgery to, you know, getting them back to sport without being able to integrate tech really easily, seamlessly, efficiently into that rehab process, given how, say, monotonous an Achilles rehab might be. So, you know, I can't imagine life and business without it.
No, and you know, that's all part and parcel with a gig, right? You got to have the scoreboard. You got to know what the progress is and how to kind of work towards, have a goal and work towards.
Especially with sport, you know, every sport has a scoreboard,
right?
So if you don't know what you're looking at, if you don't know how you're going, if you don't know if you're ahead, you're behind, you're on track. That influences decision making, so you have to have it.
Hey, when we were chatting before, you brought up this really interesting point around, you know, some of the value of the technology that's brought in, obviously from a patient and the athlete's outcomes perspective, but also from the business side of things too. You've got to kind of find that balance between being able to find those patient outcomes, but also run a sustainable and growing business too.
Sure, well, everyone has to win. And, you know, you have three primary stakeholders in your business. You have your patients or your athletes or your clients, whatever you want to call that. You have your team. And then you have the directors, investors, shareholders, equity owners. And my philosophy is that for a business to be successful, all three stakeholders need to win. So from, you know, we've spoken about the patient perspective. They need good tools that allow them to track their progress. From the team perspective, they need probably some objective data to help make informed decision making. And then from from the business owner perspective, we need ways to monetize the value that we provide. And that can be one of the challenges, especially when there are so many physiotherapists, physical therapists, allied health, whatever it might be, providing what seems to be a relatively commoditized service. We all offer treatment and diagnosis. You need to be able to differentiate that. And what we've been able to do, I think, relatively well, and perhaps why we're here, is we have found essentially 3 ways to integrate tech, specifically the VALD stuff, and that's why we're here, to create some really great monetization models for ourselves, and that's probably why we're here, yeah.
That's interesting in itself too. I think from a clinic owner's perspective, they might think about a lot of the technology that they incorporate in their practice, in the bottom section of the P&L and in the cost section, and not actually contribute a lot of that top line towards
you see it as an expense. It's at the bottom part of the P&L, but it's quite possible that's all it is. It's possible that it is only just an expense for you. And of course, I would say, do you want to change that paradigm? Because it doesn't need to be. We look at the influence of tech on our top line, and it was massive. We were able to do a whole bunch of things once we integrated tech and had a really robust battery for the testing and the rehabilitation of athletes. That has massively increased our top line. There are 3 main ways which we monetize tech. The first is in differentiation at the front end. So if we think about clinicians, physios, whoever it might be, having that initial consult, there is some price ceilings that are typically associated with that. You at the lower end, it's $100. At the upper end, it's $220, or whatever it might be. And you've got most people probably falling in that bell curve, somewhere in the middle. You push too much further than that for just offering initial consult, and you might get a fair bit of price resistance. You're under that, and people go, well, are these guys really good enough? So, you've got downsides on both sides of the curve. But what we've been able to do is completely reposition what an initial consult is. Initial consult now is no longer just your orthopedic assessments, your subjective assessments, and then a diagnosis. Your initial consult is actually a 2.5-hour process where there's athletic profiling, there's testing of good limbs, there's baseline data that's collected alongside everything I just spoke about previously. And that's got us from, $190 for a consult to $497. And ironically, you get higher uptake now with that because it seemed to be more valuable.
And to your earlier point, everyone wins, right? You can run a sustainable business and bring on more staff with confidence, quality personnel to be able to deliver those outcomes for whether it be the high-performance athletes or patients or anyone in between. So.
Yeah, and I've seen it work too in the general pop space. We get the benefit of being able to work with athletes, which helps this process along, certainly. There's no doubt about that. But this will work too, and I've seen it work with general pops as well. They have an appetite. And I think their maturity and their understanding of their own bodies and performance and tech and data is increasing. As wearables come out and all those things. And they've got an appetite too for a better objective understanding of how they're moving. So, that's one way in which we do it. Probably the most interested for those who are clinicians or clinic owners out there is what's happened to lifetime value of the customer, or patient visit average is often the acronym that's used. We typically see anywhere between, say, that 6 to 12 visit average for a solution to an injury. People get out of pain. They drop off as pain is no longer a driver, and you might monetize anywhere between, say, $1,000 to $2,000 for that patient, and there's buffer either side, of course. What we observed is the moment we started integrating tech and we were able to build tech into milestones, that went well and truly past pain into performance. We use that tech to facilitate those milestones. We increased patient visit average. We went from about $2,000 or $1,500 around there to our average is between $5,000 and $6,000 per athlete. So that's got a huge commercial effect on how you run your business, because you don't need to rely on so much acquisition because you've got more value per person you can look after. It means you invest more in them, means the team's more invested in their outcomes. There's a lot of wins that come off the back of spending more time with the same person rather than continuing to find more people.
Thank you for sharing that, because it's great inspiration for those that might be, doing something similar, or even applying it to the general population, as to say, in other clinic settings too, and hopefully helping people to think about how they can integrate technology into the way they practice and not just sit in the cost center all the time and actually do the
it does not need to sit there collecting dust. If you can find a way to build it into your offering, whether it's even just as a value add to create some differentiation and observe it over a period of time, have a look at your patient visit average for the 6 months prior to its implementation versus 6 months after, and all of a sudden you go, oh, actually that's interesting, I'm getting 2 more visits out of every patient.
Yeah, well that's macro, isn't it? You've got to measure it around the measurement.
Well, yeah, if you've got to implement measurement tools, you probably need measurement tools for the measurement tools. I tend to agree with that.
Yeah. Hey, lastly, to wrap things up, is there anything in particular you've taken away from the last couple of days here at VALDCon that you're looking to implement?
Oh, well, besides the inspiration that is VALD, to see Laurie build a team behind this vision is nothing short of inspirational, but also reminds us all to keep a really big picture. These guys are playing for the long game. I think it's really easy in business to be driven by short-term, immediate, reactive decision-making, and you can tell that the decisions that Laurie and Sam and the team are making in management here is for the long term. They're playing long term, they're thinking long term, they're keeping that central to the thesis and the vision. That's inspiring, I think, mostly for me. So it was a nice, humbling reminder that I've got a long ways to go.
My name is Shaun Palmer. I'm a physical therapist and athletic trainer in the U.S. I'm down in the state of Arizona.
Nice.
And then I'm a business development manager with VALD. So work throughout the state of Arizona through professional performance clients, health clients, and tactical in that area as well.
Nice one. I guess the Arizona weather and the Brisbane weather, there's some similarities.
Right now they're polar opposites. I think it was 115 Fahrenheit when I left there.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And then land here. This is beautiful.
Yeah, no, this is good. This is good. But so obviously being part of VALD, it's great that VALD's got such a global presence. Do you find that the conversations you're having on your side of the world are quite consistent with the conversations happening here in other parts as well?
Yeah, this is actually really interesting. We just came out of the talk with Orca Performance talking about the different challenges that they face up in Canada. It's really interesting hearing not only some of the similarities, but also some of the glaring differences. So even like things they're not allowed to do there. So even from Google reviews and stuff like that, they're saying that the government takes certain things down, or Google's algorithm is taking certain things down. So things that we have to deal with. But then the clinical side, like getting implementation and bought in from the patients, is very much the same. I mean, that's universal. Yeah,
and that's hard in an industry that, like, yes, from a clinical side, it needs to be appropriate, and I can see on one hand why having more traditional reviews is probably not great, but at the same time, it's in this blended industry around athletic performance / areas that it might be somewhat competitive. So it would be advantageous to be able to speak about all the wonderful work that's happening within these clinics. So it can be a challenging landscape, I imagine.
It's even hard too. Like a challenge beyond that is like he was saying they can't, like a physician cannot try to steer you toward any specific spot. So they came and say, hey, this place gets killer outcomes because they're implementing tech or they're doing they're a step ahead. So they can't legally say, go to this place.
Because it works, yeah.
And that's
would love to tell you what's working, but I'm not allowed to.
Right.
Yeah. And that's a bit hard. Well, I assume being in the US, you're not short of your own challenges to face. I'd love to learn, and also opportunities as well. I'd love to learn a bit more about the landscape that you're operating and maybe how some of this technology is getting some of those outcomes too.
I was giving a talk to the U.S. group today about navigating healthcare insurances. Obviously, that's every country has their own challenges with navigating that landscape. So it's one thing when you go out to like cash-based, especially when you go into like performance facilities. It's one argument. When you go into an insurance-based clinic that has to bill specific codes and specific instances and have those payer restrictions, it's a very different argument. You have to frame ROI very differently with those clinics. So it presents some challenges, but if I'm trying to teach them, like, my background has been in directing clinics and programs before, so I've been on that side of being the person you're trying to convince, that decision maker and trying to figure out that ROI with them. So I'm trying to put them in that same headspace and use that same math and figure out how you work that. And it can be extremely challenging.
Yes.
Because no one argues that using this tech, using better metrics will get you better outcomes. Nobody can argue that. But getting them to, get the ROI and the buy-in from that to see, okay, there is a path to pay for the systems, but then also just to understand how you use these metrics, because it can be so overwhelming. You look at force plate metrics and any one jump is 220 metrics. and you get completely lost in that.
I get that we need to demonstrate the return on investment for some of these technologies because they do have good patient outcomes, but how do you communicate that? And the data, I imagine, would form a good base of that communication. But you kind of already started to get to a point that I was getting to. A lot of the people making those decisions probably don't come from the clinical background and really understand the metrics they'd be looking at from the force plate and all the other kind of bits and pieces that are really important. So I imagine it's just as important to get a lot of quantitative data captured, but also building those relationships and doing a lot of general human things like communication, expectation setting, and everything. So am I kind of on the right path here? There's a bit of that balance that needs to take place too.
Yeah, I think there's first an educational pathway to see that we're just not aware of what metrics there are possible out there. So let's say with one clinic I was talking to recently, just about helping someone get up out of the chair, sit to stand to sit test. And now you can break apart how long does it actually take them to rise up fully out of that chair? Then what does their symmetry look like when they're actually out of that chair? How long does it take them to sit back down into it? And you just watch the clinician like, oh my gosh, each phase of that, like, will direct my treatment differently. I can look at speed-based stuff. I can look at what strength looks like, either coming up or out. Like, there are all these ways that now will inform their treatment, but it's different than how they're thinking.
Yeah.
Because they're just so traditional in how they've thought before. So just things that they need education.
In your experience too, in understanding the US landscape, if there are those particularly operating in Australia or potentially other parts of the world too that might be a bit overwhelmed, as might I be, in terms of trying to understand the whether it be remuneration or the way the system is funded in the US, is there any advice or ways to think about or resources that you're aware of that those from outside the system might need to think about before trying to barge their way in?
You talk about it like on our side, from like the tech company side?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And actually, it could be from, I imagine that was where I was coming from, but it'd be interesting to hear from other perspectives.
So the nice thing about our system is that we don't have, we're allowed to go outside of that, like the cash-based systems and stuff. So any clinic, whether they take insurance or not, like they can still just take a cash base and make their own, let's say, performance evaluation or something like that to get whatever money they have. You have restrictions that don't allow you to do that in other countries. So we have that freedom to do that if you're at least outside of Medicare. Medicare, you can't do whatever you want with them. So your 65 plus crowd, those are usually the easiest arguments. The ones that you can argue like, hey, here's a cash-based, evaluation or something for you. I still see patients on the side under cash base. It's a lot easier to do that and say, hey, you want to come outside the insurance system and see me because I have a higher level of ability to test you. Within the insurance-based system becomes a little bit more interesting. You can navigate. One thing I was talking to my group about is that there's a code that a lot of practitioners don't know about that they can utilize and start actually building a different type of evaluation for that's working pretty well. And these clinics that are in the insurance world, like, they want something like that. They just need to understand what those solutions are because they don't see them. They're not aware of them.
I was going to say use the term cheat codes, but that's maybe not the right term. But just being able to understand that, navigate the landscape and being able to justify all the great work that's done and be remunerated fairly for it, I think that's reasonable. Lastly, thinking about then, the stuff you'll take away from meeting up with colleagues from around the world and clinicians, to anything what are some of those key elements that you'll take away from this session back to the US?
I think it's great to hear. So one of the days we did, the leader of each kind of continent or different part of the world was talking about what's going on in their landscape. It's really interesting to hear what the unique challenges are. It also helps you think about our challenges a different way. Sometimes even thinking like, my challenges actually aren't that bad compared to that,
Puts a perspective.
I have so many clients within this area, and some people have to jump 3 countries before they have another client, go through all these borders. So that's one thing that's been interesting to hear, but also just to see the different personalities and try to learn from each of them and try to figure out tricks and stuff that maybe work over here that, hey, it's a different system, but I can implement that and that'll work.
So okay.
But also to have these different people that, now you see them on LinkedIn all the time, or, you see them on different other social media platforms. But now you've got to actually hear them talk, and you can actually reach out to them now more easily and say, hey man, I ran into this. I heard you kind of mention this at another table. Tell me a little more about this.
Makes such a
how could this help me as well? Because even, we have cultures that live in all different, countries. So I might run into someone that's from Egypt. So I can reach out to him and say, hey, culturally, explain something to me. Like we had a conversation that just didn't quite sit with me.
Love
Like,
it.
help me understand this.
Yeah.
And now I have someone they'll help me understand, so I can meet them more on that cultural level too.
For more content and community about technology and healthcare, visit talkinghealthtech.com.